Hi BookTube, it's Nadine and welcome to my second video for Widely Reading. And even though it's the middle of January, I want to look back at 7 books that I read in 2025. And I picked these 7 because they each did something really special that I love to see in fiction. And so maybe they will be special for you too. And I'm going to get started by talking about the first book. And I read this early in the year. And it is called The Extinction of Irina Ray, and it's by Jennifer Croft. Jennifer Croft is a translator. She's done a lot of translation work. You may have heard of her, but this is her first novel. So what I loved about this book is unreliable narrators. There's actually 2 of them, and that is one of my favorite things in fiction. I love a book that quietly messes with my head. And so this one, Unreliable Narrators, and it's also kind of a black comedy. And so the story is about 8 translators, actually. She writes about what she knows for her first book. And these 8 translators are gathered together in the home of world-famous author Irina Ray. And every time Irina Ray writes a new manuscript, before it's published, she has her 8 regular narrators or translators who always work with her. They come to her house, they sit around a table together, and they translate together so that they can talk about the text and translation and so on. And so they have been gathered in her home, and they all arrive in the evening. She welcomes them all, but there's something different about her. She's normally a larger-than-life person, but she seems strangely diminished. The next morning they get up to start work and Irina is gone and she does not come back. At first they start working on the translations, but they grow more and more disturbed, and so they start to look for clues about what might have happened to her. They look in her house, which is a big giant house in an old forest in Poland, a very remote rural area. They go into the little town. They go into the forest itself, and they do exploring. So that is sort of the events of the novel. But the unreliable narrators are the ones who are writing this book. So the text that we're reading is actually written by the Spanish translator of the events that she participated in. However, we are reading the English translation of that Spanish translator's novel. So the English translator and the Spanish translator have a kind of a weird history together. And so in addition to the translation, our English translator is giving us footnotes and notes and making commentary on what happened. And so both of them are unreliable. And also the full group of translators themselves are kind of an odd and quirky bunch. And the more worried, the more mysterious things seem, the weirder and quirkier they get. So this is a really layered, fun book. The next book I want to talk about is called Haven by Emma Donoghue. It was written in 2024, and I listened to it on audio read by Aidan Kelly. So what I loved about this book, it is a very short historical novel set in 7th century Ireland that is a really penetrating character study of 2 characters you come to care very much about, or I did. So the story is that a charismatic priest named Art has had a vision that he must build a monastery in a remote area far from the sinful world. He goes to a monastery and he recruits 2 monks to go with him. And so they take a vow to God, they take a vow to Art to follow him, to follow his vision. And the 2 monks, there is a young monk named Trian and an older monk named Cormac. Trian came from a fishing family, but when he was very small, the family realized they couldn't afford to feed him and they gave him to the monastery. So he's essentially lived there most of his life. The older monk, Cormac, was a subsistence farmer and a mason, a stonemason, and he lost his entire family in the plague. And he is in the monastery because he was in despair. He didn't know what else to do with his life. So these 3 monks set out in a rowboat down the river into the ocean, and Art sees a giant rock, essentially, in the middle of the sea. And it exists today. It's called Skellig Michael. But this is the place that he picks for them to build a monastery. And the story is about them trying to build the monastery. And they don't get very far because it is a very difficult place to live. It's uninhabited for a reason. And although Trian is good at fishing from his experience, and Cormac is a subsistence farmer and also a mason, Art's focus is entirely on building this monastery, on copying the Bible, not on survival. He says God will provide. And so it's a continual conflict because Trian and Cormac realize they're all going to die if they don't support themselves. But the beauty of this book is that we really get to know Trian and Cormac. And being 7th century monks, they're very foreign, very different, and yet there's a universal kindness and a universal beauty that they find in each other in the natural world. And being part of that was a really wonderful experience for me. Also, the audio, I can't recommend it enough in audio because Aidan Kelly's narration, his beautiful Irish brogue is just delicious, and it really brought it to life for me. My next book is called Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor, and she is a British poet, and this is, I believe it's her first novel. And what I loved about this was the writing. Her writing is just gorgeous, just so vivid and beautiful. And this is from 2025, and I don't think it's been published in the United States yet. I had to order it from Blackwell's, but boy, it was worth it. So this is a speculative novel, I guess. It's set in the far future, 2233, and a woman named Jones walks into a tattoo parlor, and she is covered in tattoos herself, just covered in them. And she tells them that she wants them to draw a line between every tattoo that she has. And as they do that, she tells them the story of her tattoos. So each of these tattoos takes place in a totally different time and place. From 19th century Lancashire all the way up to a far, far future where some sex worker vigilantes are seeking justice. So the reason why she is in all of these stories is because she has the ability, and all the women in her family do, where she falls into another life. She doesn't know what happens, she's just suddenly there. And she can be there for days, hours, or months. And she lives this other life. And the one thing that all of these stories have in common is they're all about violence against women and women taking ownership. So I think the best thing to do, since it's really the writing that is so amazing, is just to show you a little quote from it. And I'm going to read it, but I'm also going to show you on the screen so that you can turn my awful reading ability off if you want and just look at the text. So here I go. One gunshot in the center of a girl and the whole town falls in after her. Her parents, her brother, her first boyfriend, the best friend who is really her lover, the entire school, the college she would have attended, the practice where she would have worked as a barrister, and all the people she would have defended. They fall into the wound too, and her future children, they follow her into nothing, and their children, and all the changes that would have been made by them. Everything is sucked into the black hole at the center of her and stays there. So my next book I also picked for the writing, although it's a very different kind of writing. This is a really funny book with a very wry, deadpan narrator that I just loved. And the book is called Early Sobrieties, and it is written by Michael Diegler and published in 2024. And I hadn't heard about this book from anyone. I just pulled it off the new bookshelf at the library. I read the first page, and I was completely in on it. And I'm not the only person that noticed the wonders of this book, because it won the PEN/Hemingway Award for debut fiction. So this main character is Monk. His name is Dennis Monk, but everyone calls him Monk. He's 26 years old, and he is 6 months sober. So before that, he has spent a good chunk of his high school and college life very drunk. And now, with no job and nowhere to live because his parents have moved away, he is on a 6-month couch surfing apology tour of all the people he wronged in South Philadelphia. This takes place in South Philadelphia, and if you have ever been there or are from there, you're going to want to read this book. It's a bit of a love letter to the city as well. So, Monk is on this tour, and what I want to do is read you just a few lines so that you can kind of get an idea of what he's like. And so, of himself, he says, "In high school as in college, I loaded up on as many literature classes as were available to me. I'd been misinformed about the centrality of F. Scott Fitzgerald to the American job market. Bouncing from place to place without the stress of obligations liberated a certain kind of post-ambitious person. Even sober, I found existence simplified by sleeping on a cot next to a washing machine." Of his brother, he says, "We'd never been close. We'd each wished to be closer, though never at the same moment." And then a final, slightly more extended paragraph where he gives you and he'll do this, he'll give you interesting historical facts about places in South Philadelphia. And so this one is about the Acme supermarket. And he says, "The Acme supermarket was built on the former site of Moyamensing Prison, a medieval-looking fortress that once hosted a suicidal Edgar Allan Poe for a night. I like to imagine that his spirit infested the property. There, by the bin of pomegranates, I pictured him on a cot just like mine, sleeping off a drunk after they fished him out of the Schuylkill. There, by the display of coconut oil, he vomited whiskey and river water onto the floor of his cell. Around us, shoppers shopped, refusing to be haunted." My next book is what I think of as a true grit book, a Western-flavored book that is really short, sharp, and doesn't waste a single word. And so I found it in Dusk by Robbie Arnott, published in 2024. And he's an Australian author. So this story is of twins, Floyd and Iris, who at the time are about 36 years old, and we're dropped into their lives, first page. They're on horseback heading up to the highlands to make some money. There is a puma up there who has been killing sheep and a couple people as well. And so there is a big bounty to capture him, and that's where they're going. The twins are also kind of running away from not just their past, but their parents' past, because their parents were notorious drunks and thieves, and they've kind of unfairly inherited dislike, and so they are always on the road. So when I first read this book, I wasn't quite sure where it was set or when it was set, and especially because although there were no amenities, they're on horseback, I couldn't really tell if it was the 19th century or just a remote place that didn't have electricity or many amenities. And I realized not far on that it was set in Tasmania. Makes sense because he's an Australian author. And so the story is of the people they meet, their attempts to capture the puma, and it's a great adventure. But what I loved most about it was the relationship between the twins. I don't think in the book they spoke more than 100 words aloud to each other, and yet their communication was almost like telepathy, with just a little bit of body language, a little look in their eye. They knew what each other was thinking and doing without saying a word. So I love this as a short Western with a big punch. My next book does something that I really love with historical fiction, and that it takes a classic novel and reimagines it in some way. And this book is Fagin the Thief by Allison Epstein, written in 2025 and narrated by Will Watt, and it was wonderful on audio. So, as you can guess from the title, this is Oliver Twist, but who is a very minor side character in the story about Fagin, Jacob Fagin. And this is a case where a character is rescued from the prejudices of the past and brought to us in his full humanity. And we see Fagin from his earliest memories as a child into his later years. And we see him as a complex human being, somebody with a heart and a soul. It's not, he's not cleaned up, he's not romanticized, and we really feel like we are there in 19th century London. We are in the ghetto neighborhoods, we're in the Jewish quarter, we are with the underclass, and it's very vivid. We see all the characters. She sticks pretty much to the plot of Oliver Twist, but I think we see even more deeply into Sykes, into Nancy, into all of the boys, including the Artful Dodger. And the narration is just wonderful. Will Watt really brings Fagin to life. We really feel like we know him. The last book I'm going to talk about is the last one that I read for the year, and it is a science fiction, and I was looking for kind of a Becky Chambers type warm, cozy-ish science fiction, and what I found is The Inevitable by Daniel Hope, and this was published in 2025 by a small press in Portland, Oregon called Hawthorne Press. And I would say that I wouldn't call this cozy. I would call it something more like Ishiguro's Clara and the Sun, because it's about a humanoid robot that you get to know very, very well and that you get to really care about. But the difference, whereas Clara and the Sun was a domestic story, this is definitely science fiction, more action-oriented. You've got the planets, the spaceships, you've got a chase in the air by air cars, and you've also got a thriller here. So you have greedy corporations, espionage, and then there is death, as you can guess by the title, The Inevitable. But it's not like a gritty, shot in the face kind of death. It's more losing characters. This is very much a character-driven book. So this is Tuck. He is the main character, and he is the last remaining robot in the galaxy. A few decades previously, there were some robot wars. Apparently, they were worried about the singularity, and all of the robots were destroyed except Tuck. And now he spends all his time going from planet to planet trying to find spare parts for himself. And as you can see, it gets increasingly difficult. So this was a really good character story. And also what I loved about this book, this has never happened to me before, is I actually loved the book, the physical book, the artwork on the cover. It's soft, even the pages are kind of soft, and it's got a nice heft to it and a really tight spine. And so bravo Hawthorne Press. Not only did they find a great new author, they really did him justice with the book itself. So that is everything that I have to say here. Thank you if you stuck it all the way out to the end. I'm glad to see you. Let me know what you're reading, what your 2025 was like, what your favorite books were. If you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, and what your plans are for next year. And Thanks for being here. Take care. Be well.